All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Strange Mosaic, and it's been a couple, well, I guess I did record a show last week while I was in Los Angeles, but it's been a couple of weeks since I've been on regular recording, but I'm back in Austin and back at it. And one of the pleasant surprises of the last few months was the last show that I did. Well, it wasn't my last show, but the last show with this guest, a show I did a few months back with JJ Reine de Blanc. I think it might have been my best show of the year. I mean, there's many ways of measuring that metric. Some people think it depends on how popular it is, how many views, like what wonderful new thing you uncovered or discovered. But like, I don't know, there is just something about the tone and the feel and the places the conversation went. And I really enjoyed the format of having a chat with someone I had never met or spoken to or really listened to or anything before, and just seeing how it went. And it's inspired me to want to find a way to do more of that, but it's also inspired me to want to talk to her some more. So JJ, welcome back. How are you?
Well, thank you. I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm good. It seems like you're my new entry guest. So every time I get back to Austin, you're the first, right? All my recent trips, you're the person I talk to like the day after I get back. Right. So that's I didn't do that intentionally, but that's just the way it played out. And
well, it's truly an honor.
and you're in a new place. You're in a new place, and I've revisited an old one. So we have some interesting stuff to catch up on there, and then we can continue the conversation we started last time. How is Chicago treating you?
It's good. I actually really haven't ventured out too much outside of my little bubble, couple block radius here. Simply because I haven't been able to work for so many months, and I'm really trying to get caught up with that. And it's, the area, it's nice, but apparently it's not as nice as it used to be. It can be a little sketchy.
Mm-hmm.
And for once in my life, I feel like well, it's not the first time, but I feel like a fish out of water. I don't understand the transportation here. And I'm sure it's really easy, but for a person who doesn't drive, I've kind of I've decided, hey, it's almost winter. I'll just wait for the spring. Fortunately, my place is so nice and large that I don't feel like I'm getting cabin fever so much as I used to, where I felt like I had to go out all the time.
Right.
Just feel like I had some kind of, it's odd. I would go out in the city to feel like I had some personal space, if it makes any sense.
Right.
So here I'm staying inside like a crazy hermit. And when I venture out, it's pretty much to go food shopping or to the shopping center. And I've noticed some very interesting things out there. But I haven't gone out too much. I did go to the lake last week, which was really nice.
So you live in a neighborhood where you have pretty much most of the things you need pretty close in, so you don't have to venture out in order to take care of your daily needs. That's good. That's a nice thing generally about living in a city. And just energetically though, being there, how does it feel compared to, where you came from and from New York and whatnot? Like, how does it feel in general?
It feels a lot better to me,
Mm-hmm.
just overall, despite whatever crime activities are in the area. It still feels more comfortable to me, just overall, energetically.
Yeah.
The frenzy of being in the New York City area, it was like I just couldn't calm down at all. I felt really on edge. I felt everyone else's anxiousness and all of that stuff. So, and just I know there's a lot of tech here too. And there's been some strange buzzing that sounds like cicadas up until pretty recently, and it's well past the season. There's a buzzing that goes on outside.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, New York was so electrified just with all the tech and the frequencies and the water there. it just feels different here for some reason. I'm not really sure why.
I think there's a perceptible difference just between the Midwest and then the coastal large cities in general. So I think there's some of that. I mean, Chicago had a pretty harsh lockdown. It has a pretty harsh crime rate. It has some of the same kind of politics in general that Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York have, but it is a Midwestern city for sure. And it's always struck me, I've never been to Chicago. It's one of the places that I've not been that I would like to go. But it feels like as in general, the city has more residential charm than New York City does, right? Like it feels like more neighborhoody even within the city limits than like Los Angeles. Los Angeles has so many parts. There's like not really just like one specific downtown, even though there's only one area called downtown, right? But when you're in a very urban area of Los Angeles, it feels less neighborhoody than Chicago looks when I look at pictures or when I see it in TV shows or movies. So I think like that is probably part of it. And then just that it is in the Midwest, which has a much different feel than either of the coasts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You're dead on with the neighborhood feel here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived in Brooklyn and Jersey City and places like that where it has a bit more of a neighborhood feel, but it's still, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the Midwest thing or whatever, but
The other thing I think is maybe different is lake or river cities versus ocean cities, right? And even though New York has sort of got the Hudson River on one side and the ocean kind of on the other, and Los Angeles also the ocean on one side, and then there is a river running through it that most people aren't aware of because it's not the way we think of a river generally, but it is a river.
right.
But I think the feel of cities on the ocean are much different than the feel of cities on lake or river as the main, kind of water thing, right? It's just it's different. I mean, the minerals in the water are different. The flow of the water is different. What they are used for is different. And the relationship one has with them also is different. And I think all of those things add to how the overall energetics of a city.
Yeah, and I'm thinking when you're talking about that with the ocean, it makes me think of all the salt content and how that may perhaps somehow adjust the energetics and the frequencies in a different way than, say, a fresh lake. I mean, obviously, it depends on whatever kind of rock is there, like quartz or whatever. But to me, the salt thing seems
the salinity of it, and then also just it's much more vast expanse, right? Like there are rivers that are very wide and there are lakes that are really, really big and even have some characteristics of ocean for sure. But at the end of the day, they are not kind of endless quite in the same way oceans are, right? Like oceans basically go on until they just meet up with another ocean. Right. And so there's just this sort of massive, it's like more like whatever our idea of a void is or space or whatever, right? Like it's just this sort of endless, kind of the only thing I could think of that would equal it in our ability to understand is like the vast expanse of some of the deserts, right? Of like the Sahara Desert or the Gobi Desert that are just enormous and seemingly endless, same stuff, right? And then the other thing I think with the ocean is I think we're just very like this sounds like stupid to say, but like this is the way my mind classifies it. Like there's like ocean chauvinism in our reality, right? People like when they think about places that they would like to live or like these things that are massively powerful in terms of their ability to control our relationship with nature, many more people think ocean than river or lake.
Oh yeah, and I was one of them too.
Me
Until
too.
I saw Lake Michigan and I've seen some of the other lakes over the years and recently, and I'm like, wow, I was wrong. It feels like definitely like an inland sea It always makes me think of the Black Sea. Um, but this lake here, you can't see the other side. There's all kinds of huge ships, and the water can be very turbulent, uh,
Mhm.
with the waves crashing at the beach like it was the other day when I went. So it seems very much like an ocean. And so I've got a new appreciation for, the differences between the ocean and some fresh water.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The lakes that you live near, like, I don't know if you've seen, there was like a really cool special on Vice that I hate most of what Vice does at this point, but when they stick to shit like this, they're still pretty good. But one of my listeners sent me a video because he knows this guy, about this guy who's considered like the ice surfer of Lake Superior. Right. And he, like, it's crazy. You can like just look it up, like Vice ice surfer, Lake Superior or Lake Michigan or whatever it is. And it's like, wow, that's fascinating. Right. It literally is like epic in the same way that people think of like the Maui pipeline or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But they do it when it's ice outside. Right. They do it when it's freezing cold. And then you think about like the Great Salt Lake, or if you want a real mystery, you think of like the Salton Sea, right, in Southern California, and obviously the Dead Sea and all these different places. Like the Earth, whatever the fuck it is, didn't always look like it does now, won't always look like it does now. And like, I'm not certain that we're even very clear on how all of this works. I mean, we've all obviously seen how like there's fossils on like the highest peaks in some places that are of animals that should be at the bottom of the ocean, right? And so just because something is an ocean now doesn't mean it won't be a lake later, and vice versa. Yeah. Right. And mineral content shift and change and whatever, whatnot. But yeah, lakes, rivers, they have much more motion to them than a lot of people think. And the activities around them are, interesting in their own way. I still have not read, but it's on my pile of books that need reading, the book Time Rivers by Goro Adachi, which, basically, I think basically correlates the flow of rivers to cycles of time, right? So there's different ways to think about that. But the relationship that I have with the city that I live in, living close to the water here, is very, very different than the relationship I had to the ocean when I lived in Los Angeles. Now, granted, I never lived in Los Angeles walking distance from the water the way that I do here. But I definitely observed like sort of the lifestyle of people who lived in Santa Monica and Venice and places like that, based on the fact that I had a lot of appointments there. So I did spend a fair amount of time there. Right. And it's very different. Right. It's very different. And I'm pretty much at the place now where I think I like living on a river, more than I would like living on the ocean. Sure, it's nice if you're like a wealthy person and you can have a nice place and but you're actually just kind of separate from everyone on your big spot on the beach. Whereas here, living downtown on the river or downtown on the lake, there's like a lot of interesting action and activity that involves the water, that involves the lake and the river, not just people who are, boating or kayaking or running around the lake or whatnot, but just the fact that there's so much city activity, so much urban jungle, so much noise and chaos and whatever happening so proximate to that body of water that's moving through in a different way than it is cities that are near the ocean, right?
Yeah.
That I really enjoy it. The first couple times I lived in Austin, I paid no attention to the lake or the river. And this time it's like largely the focus of my experience.
It's funny thing how things change. And I grew up on a lake, or not on it, but close to a lake, much smaller than these lakes here. But there is a certain culture around lakes and rivers that is different from the ocean, for sure. And the activities and the daily rituals of people, what they do. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, where I live, it's a river that has been dammed off into lakes, right? And it's almost like each segment of the river or each segment of the various lakes has like a completely different culture, but they're right next to each other. So you can like, it's almost like being like, what's that, around the world in 80 days, or like you can do backpack through, or you can, be in 6 cities in Europe over the course of a week or whatever. It's kind of like that. Like every day you can run through, a variety of different cultures, just, all kind of proximate to each other right here, It's quite fascinating. How do you find the people in Chicago versus the people in New York, just in terms of how they're coping with our present stated reality? Are they still COVID paranoid? Are they still election and president demented? Like, how's it there?
All of that. Well, I have noticed over the last, I would say, month, something close to a month, that as the time has passed, people are wearing, I see more and more masks every time I go out again. And yeah, the political stuff seems to be really on the forefront here still.
Yeah, I think
I really could care less. I mean, if it's going to majorly affect something,
right.
I'm just not very political. I
Yeah.
don't think on those terms anymore. I'm not putting anyone down who does.
Yeah.
It's just part of the big circus attraction going on for me. So I don't really put too much credence into it, but I do see a lot of people, I mean, especially because we're coming up on an election again, just blanketing the neighborhood with flyers and stuff. And
it's fascinating to observe, right? I'm the same, right? Like I just see it all as like, another portion of the clown show, right? But it's fascinating to observe like how distorted behavior becomes as a response to the reality that's, the few main realities that are being projected at us, right?
right.
How people just take for granted that, of course, you agree with them, right? I was in Los Angeles, and for a good portion of the trip, I was really just around family. And then the last weekend, I went out and did more general socializing, and I went to a Halloween party, and I went to an underground warehouse party kind of thing. But it was interesting how to see in person some people who acted like absolute ass clowns over the course of the lockdown, just like acting normal again. Like I'm sure you've heard there's this article that's come out that suggests grant people COVID amnesty. Have you heard this?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Right. So there's that. And then there's also like, I read a good article that was like, kind of, I had an experience with my dad that was sort of the same. Like my dad was listening to NPR, and they were interviewing this guy who wrote a book, basically the premise of which was the deep state doesn't exist, but if it did, it's a good thing because it saved us from the nation from the excesses of Donald Trump. And then there was this article that was like basically alluding to the same kind of thing, but like talking about being gaslit by people who are saying like lockdowns never really happened, but if they did, they saved you, and if they would have been done better, it would have saved more people, but they didn't really happen, so none of it really matters, right? It's like this complete it's a gaslighting, right? So I see these people out at parties just acting as if life is normal again, right? Kind of thing on some level. Then I also saw what you're talking about. There seems to be a great masking up going on again. I'm not paying attention to whatever layer of media that fear porn is being driven from, or whether it's just, I don't know what it is with why, or if it's more like nuclear fear. I don't know what the people are responding to it.
I don't know. It's kind of baffling to me. I haven't heard anything. I'm not checking constantly local news to see what may or may not be happening with variants or other health scares, but
Yeah.
to be going on. And then I've also seen what you're talking about, where people are actually almost on the verge of really reckless and risky behaviors as if nothing happened. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
interesting to watch. It really is.
Well, what's interesting is, so I'm at this house party, right, with people who, of only a few of whom I know personally, but most of whom I have observed from varying distances for many years. When I say varying distances, meaning would see these people at parties, but I don't know them personally, or I have never seen them at a party, but I see their name constantly pop up on people's Facebook pages that I'm friends with. So, right. So like and they seem to be remotely from the party scene or the sort of art scene in Los Angeles, right? Or people that I don't know, but I've heard about from other people or whatever, right? So I'm at this party with a lot of these people, or people who I've admired some of their works over the years, but I don't know them personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm at this party, and mind you, I've observed all of these people's behavior online over the last couple of years, right? And but then observing them there, right, acting as if everything is normal after they had extended out into absolute absurdity for a couple of years. They're pretending everything is normal. I mean, everything is normal, but that's besides the point. But they're also still just talking to people, not each other, and then people who they don't know or they don't know very well, me, as if obviously my point of view on the world is in line with theirs, right? And that with zero acknowledgement, right, that not only that there was distorted behavior, but that there could be any people in the world who weren't down with or doing the distorted behavior, at least not that kind, right? And just this weird sort of like shape-shifting back into whatever their normal pose was before, in terms of behavior, but like still saying and believing the same dumb shit they did before. Right? It's fascinating to watch,
It's definitely a big social experiment. It really is. And yeah, I'm seeing all that myself, and people assuming from the way I look and the way I dress that I have a certain political affiliation.
Right. Yeah.
Which is so wrong. But hey.
Like the most fascinating part, like, so I'm trying to square away this experience in my head, right? Like, how does this happen? So there were people there who I know at one point within this past year, right? Early this year, but within this past year, said things like they don't think people who didn't take the pokeroonie should be able to go to parties or really should be able to function in public society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they're there interacting with me, who they've never had the conversation with about whether I took it or not. So how are they squaring away in their mind that, right? How does that, like 6 months ago, I believed that, and now I either don't believe that or forgot about that or whatever, to the point where they're not checking to make sure I'm not one of those people, right? Like it's very, and they're just acting as if they're not doing that, right? That they never thought that, and they're also not doing that. And I'm just like, how does that even go? Like, I know exact sentences that some of these people said that were literally akin to like, purity testing of race and religion or something like that we used to have in the kinds of apartheids of old, right? Or the kind of thing.
Right. Or just like witch hunting, like, oh, we're going to go with our torch and our pitchforks. It's been really nuts. And yeah, now even throughout the whole thing, I felt like I had to just sort of fly under the radar and pretend, because they were all right with me and I knew I was like, these people are going to turn me in or something if they find out that I haven't done the deed,
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Then there's other people who I never heard say anything, but I assumed maybe thought that stuff. But right, but I wasn't sure. And I come to find out that like, they never really thought that stuff, right? Like that they kind of went along with some of it because they couldn't have interruptions to their financial life, or like one of their parents is sick and to get in to see them, they had to do this, that, or the other thing, but they didn't really have any thoughts or opinions one way or another, other than like, they just didn't want to be hassled. Right. And so there's just the vast, it's like a cornucopia of fruit flavors, but there's like some extremes on either side that I just am fascinated at how people are able to like, just continue on without having to resolve that at all. In their own mind, like forget about what anyone else thinks. I would just be curious to know how they resolve that in their own mind.
I don't know. I mean, it's reminded me of, I just watched this video yesterday where a guy's talking about how we basically impose meaning and definition and language to our surroundings. And the act of putting a definition on something can be very limiting.
Yeah.
So I feel like these people, they've somehow created something in their heads that they think is what things should be like, and then that kind of creates a, I don't know how to put it really.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's confining and limiting for their viewpoints. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't know really where I was going with that, but
well, it feels like it resembles the idea that I learned about from Ibrahim Karim, who's the guy who's like really well known for biogeometry. And I always forget, for some reason, which side of the brain is the creative side of the brain? The right brain is a creative brain, and the left is the logic.
Like the opposite of what you normally think.
Okay, so so he was talking about this time where people, like some things started to happen with the way like our brain was changing, but also like the way societies and religions and stuff developed, and that there started to become this sort of problem and this separation between like people who understand spiritual matters and people who don't, when they started applying left brain logic to right brain content. And that's when we started to have personification of energies and creations of gods. So when you, instead of just experiencing what something feels like, this need to be able to define it, right, started to create these, like, call it some sort of like icon or egregore or whatever, where this collection of feelings or experiences are assigned to something with this name.
Yeah.
And, right. And then that's why, like, you know, you see like, you know, whatever, Zeus throwing lightning or something like that, right? Like whenever there's a storm and whatever, you Zeus, okay, whatever, right? He must be doing it, right? It's a he that must be doing it, as opposed, right? Because we have grouped together certain experiences with something that we identify, like some being or a title that we identify that grouping of things with, and then they become in charge of that, right? It was an interesting idea. And so there was these people in Egypt called the netters, right? Mm-hmm. And the netters were able to sort of sequester these things away. Am I getting this right? Like the netters still had the ability to sort of keep separate these sort of energies, like this, the right brain and the left brain type of thing, right? To keep awareness of that. Or if I think I may be confusing exactly the process, but like in the old, like Egyptian paintings and scribes and stuff, you will see these beings that have these nets, right? And the net is sort of capturing that stuff that most people's brain mixes all together. There was a long time. Does that make sense?
Recording it with an unbiased viewpoint. But it almost reminds me of the observers in
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so, you know, and there's even that part in Fringe where he's talking to Peter and saying, you humans make so much meaning of everything. Right. And that's actually like a really true statement about things. Like we both like makes too much meaning of things, and also we like fail to understand what things mean. Both things are true.
Yep.
Right. And so these netters were sort of capable of walking that line. So yeah, so it's definitely interesting. To reflect on, and it's interesting how there's just like, there was a flavor during this past several years for sort of like each city, right? Some cities were focused on in terms of their response or lack thereof a response to all the things that have gone on. And it's almost like the cities have become gods or people, right?
Yeah. And it's fascinating. It's like they all had their different experiments going on.
Yeah.
See let's try this, let's try that, and the people living in those cities, it's almost like an algorithm or cells within a body, how they react to a certain stimuli or something.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that. So yeah, you have all these little pockets of kind of the same thing happening in different ways throughout these different places.
Well, it's kind of like, if you imagine like a city is kind of like a university campus, right? And then within each campus, there's like the different buildings that are for whatever topic. You have the biology building and the math building, right? Mm-hmm. And then within each building, you have different classrooms or labs where different kinds of biology or different kinds of math are being studied, right? Different experiments are going on there. And so you could associate these cities are like this. You have this vast expanse of land, and then you have neighborhoods, right? And you have, in some cases, buildings. And in those buildings, there are apartments, and you know what I mean? In the apartments, rooms, and each is like slightly different, portion of the experiment, different flavors, right? Mm-hmm. Different tones of it. But I definitely see it that way as well. And you now you live in Chicago, so you have Beetlejuice as the reigning god.
I moved to the best place.
Right?
Can't wait for January when we have what is that? Basically, we can get kidnapped and murdered and
what is it?
There's some kind of law that's being removed or whatever, so that you have basically no protection if something happens to you. Mm-hmm. It's great.
Yeah. Sounds great. Should be exciting. So let's kind of take this chance to move into sort of our topic at hand. And, when you were here last time, we really got into a conversation about the city, New York at that time, and the buildings and sort of, a more metaphysical look at location and architecture and experiences within those locations. And one of the things I had wanted to, and I did, after our show, I had a really vivid dream. That's interesting. Last night was the most vivid dream I've had since this other one. I should tell you about this thing that happened last night as well. But it's funny, after we did that show, I can't remember if it was like later that afternoon or that night, I was laying in that space in between sleep and wakingness, and like I saw what the building that you showed me, not the one that you were in, but I have thoughts about that one too. But the one that was like that crazy building, it showed me what it was. And so I have been pursuing this topic from that position ever since. And in the second hour, I'm going to tell you what that building and what I've noticed about a lot of other buildings are and what I think is going on. So if people want to hear that, be sure to stay tuned for the second hour. And maybe I'll tell you the dream then, because that kind of correlates with the dream of from last time. But one thing we didn't get to that I had wanted to talk about with you, I think it came up for just a second, but we were just on top of other things. And then in the comment section after our show went out, people said they would have liked to have heard us talk about this. And I was like, that was kind of my plan, but we didn't get there. Was reflections, right? And like sort of reflective realities within the cities. And I talk a lot about the way the city of Austin reflects in the water. So in that sense, the reflection, but then also all of these buildings that are being erected that are very unusual. And a lot of them look like pieces of technology and various other things, but many, if not most of them, all have reflective surfaces, whether they be like mirrors or just very reflective glass, at least in some portions of the building, right? And it creates all kinds of interesting visual effects. And then if you allow yourself to kind of sink into those ideas, effects on your imagination and on your perception of reality. So I thought here in this first hour, we could kind of hit on that, which we didn't get to talk about last time. And that is just the way the cities sort of reflect themselves. So that sounds good to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to show some pictures of kind of like what I'm talking about, just some general pictures here. And then I actually went through some of my collection of pictures that I've taken here in Austin. But I wanted to start with just the first thing that I talked about, which is, I just typed in today, cities reflected in the water. And just keeping it general for now, right? So what I'm talking about is when you get some stuff like this, right? Where you see almost any variety like of, some days there's no reflection. Like some days I'll go out there and it's not, the lake is the lake, the city is the city, and there's nothing. And then there's other days where you get like almost a 100% perfect view of some portion of the city or the entire cityscape reflects in the water. And then there's everything in between where you have like it's blurred or it's sort of like fragmented or wobbly looking. I just typed in any cities here. This is not a specific city per se, but you can see the kind of thing. Like here you have almost an exactly perfect, like you wouldn't, how would you know which one was the real one and which was the reflection?
Yeah.
Right. And then you have some others where it's like, oh, that's kind of artistic the way it's the way it is, you know, and all of the stuff. Yeah. Or that's artistic. I hear this one's even a painting. So somebody obviously painted that idea. Right. And then you sometimes get something like, this, where it's like kind of just very, very slightly indicated in the water and sort of wobbly looking. Right. My favorite is when you get stuff like this. Like, right. And so, you know, there's the argument that can be made that, oh, well, it's just the reflection in the water. That's normal. Right. And I get that. And it's beautiful nonetheless. And even if that is all it is, but when you get a perfect reflection like this, right, I have more questions. And then also when you get a slightly distorted reflection, again, I have more questions. And the, you know, then you start getting into, you know, the upside down and various other ideas that we can explore here. But like, what do you think about this? Is this, I didn't notice this when I lived in New York. I certainly noticed it. I noticed it here. Right. I looked to see if there was what Chicago kind of looked like, and I couldn't find too many pictures of a perfect reflection in the water, but I may have just been searching for it wrong. So is this something that you've noticed, that you've looked into, that you've spent time thinking about, or what is your sort of thoughts about this type of idea?
Well, I have noticed it. I did notice it quite a bit this last summer when I was in New York. And I guess I wanted to bring up the fact that, you know, water kind of, well, apparently it has memory now, and it has sort of a sentience to it. So the fact that things are reflecting in water, it makes me wonder the way that things are being stored in water, these reflections, and how the water can maybe sort of, I mean, it's obviously mimicking it in a reflection. It's a mimic factor going on. I don't know what to say about it. I think also the fact that when we call something solid, it's not really a solid. There isn't really a true solid in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have, everything, you have these particles that are moving really fast, and they're actually, when you zoom in to the micro, you can see that there's a lot of distance between the atoms and the different particles. There's
Mm-hmm.
all this empty space in between, and it's not actually solid. These aren't grouped together. So when you have these different planes of glass and mirrors on these buildings, and to me, I feel like there's a lot of room for different frequencies and perhaps dimensions to be seeping through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting really weird here, but to me, that says that everything that we're perceiving in this reality has the ability to morph and change really at any time,
Mm-hmm.
if it's sort of tweaked with by something else external, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my thoughts are largely similar to yours, but it's something I have spent a lot. I've just become like, if I didn't have work I needed to do to make a living, and if I didn't have just other personal needs and needs of other people I care about to tend to, like, I could probably get really carried away with this, right? And I'm trying to figure out how to, I want to allow that experience into my life, but in a sort of intentional and managed way, in terms of like, I want to give myself pockets of time to just disappear into this idea. And then, but I don't want to make it the focus of my life to the point that I become a madman, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you could really
Very easily, like very
down
easily.
the rabbit hole and never get out.
And in this case, literally fall down the rabbit hole if you do it, right? And so I think there's a way that this could be approached. There's a system of sort of like measurement, and I don't mean measurement in its like most clinical way, right? But I think that like this could become the kind of endeavor, like people who, like professional athletics is not really a measured endeavor, right? It's all encompassing. But you have people who like are into things like intramural soccer, or, whatever kind of thing, where like they work jobs or they whatever, but they play regularly, and they even like travel to other places either with the intention of going there to play, or just anytime they're traveling, they join up with people who do that there, right? And they improve and they learn new things. And like, I think it could become like a peripheral activity that had some degree of intention and discipline and measurement to it, but that like didn't have to completely overtake my entire life, right? Yeah. Unless that becomes the determined reality. If that exploration does manifest into something that is obviously makes everything else make sense, and then that is like an accepted new reality or whatever, then different, right? But I've watched brilliant people go insane and never get anywhere when they just don't put any limits on the sort of exposure, right? So I've been playing with this quite a bit, and I'm going to go through, and if I mean, I talk about this a lot to Laura. If I leave out any part of this, I'm going to start with the water stuff, and then we can move to like the way the buildings reflect on each other a little bit. But there's like a bunch of ideas that come up, and so I'm just going to start streaming through them, and kind of, I'd love to hear what you have to say, if any of them have occurred to you, right? Or whatnot. So obviously, probably what helped me to have like a frame of reference for this was the fact that I noticed this stuff after we got Stranger Things and the idea of the upside down, right? Now, obviously, like the way it's displayed there is not like geographically the things are in the same locations, but it's not a perfect reflection. It's a very distorted reflection, right?
Yeah.
So that helped me to understand that there could be like a world below. You know, I'm not a person inclined towards religion, so I don't think of hell as being down there and heaven as being upstairs, right? I kind of thing. And I've spent enough time in the underground that, like, even if that, you know, I know some people consider raves or warehouse parties to be like hellish, but for me, like, I like that and, you know, whatever. So, okay. And then you start to think about, and I know you've been recently rewatching Fringe, the two universes and how similar they were, but just slight differences. And we didn't think of that as being upside down, but you kind of could have. We kind of thought about them being like right next to each other, like bumping up against each other, but
Yes.
it could be like on top of or below or whatever, right? So those ideas started to help me to play with this. And then I started to just go, okay, well, why do in all of these cities, and we're experiencing this now in Austin, like there seems to be this mad rush. Everybody wants to be on the same few blocks that reflect right into the water, right? Now, sure, there's the standard explanation of, well, everybody wants to live or have their property on the water. It's very valuable, right? But like, literally you could like be a block over or 2 blocks over and have 3 times as much space for the same amount of money, or, you know, there seems to be something very important about having your reality reflected in the water, having your logo or having your building or your headquarters reflect below. And then I'm sure you're familiar with like the whole topic about state capitals are all near bodies of water, so they reflect.
Yes. Yep.
Right. So I started to play with that idea, like, oh, it's just like an amplifier, right? It makes you more powerful. It, you know, something, it does some sort of metaphysical amplification. That was like my first thought, right?
I'm with you there. I was thinking about that when I was staying, because of all the sounds bouncing off the water. It made me think about that quite a bit.
Right. Okay. So that all sounds good. Okay. And then I started to think about, well, like, what if there is like a real upside down? Like, what if there is another Austin right below this Austin, right? That, you know, because I think almost anyone who listens to any of the content you or I would like or listen to, we recognize that there is more than one reality, right? But we don't know exactly how it works. Is it dimensional? Is it timeline? Is it all this kind of stuff? Like, what if there is another or maybe many versions of Austin, many other versions of Austin? But how they connect somehow is like this, where like when you have a day where there's a perfect reflection in the water of it, you could access it. So like maybe that is just jumping right in the water at the plate, right? Jumping in the water and you go down there.
It's giving me chills when you're saying that, because I'm like, oh my God, that sounds like something that's completely plausible. Like it. Anyway, go ahead. It's
okay, right. So
I love it.
Maybe on those days. So then it's like, okay, so maybe when it's reflected with a certain amount of, what do you call it? When it's like a fidelity, right? With the above a certain degree of fidelity, so that it looks just like the thing you think of as the original, then you can have access to it. So maybe it's just jumping in the water and you go down there and you'll see, oh my God, there it is, right? Maybe it is like you jump in the water. It doesn't really matter. Like you wouldn't necessarily have to get in the water right where the building you're trying to go to is reflected. Just getting in the water on a day like that water just becomes a portal to somewhere else that is just represented in the water. And it's not really physically right below it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it works like that. Maybe it isn't that access is always there, but you have to wait for a perfect reflection day in order to be able to get back. That like in order to be able to get back, it has to be pretty close to perfect fidelity.
Right. Things have to line up. It's
Yes. Right.
perfect conditions.
Yes.
Situation.
Right. So I started thinking about it in those senses. And then you start to go, okay, now, does this require there be any actuality to this at all? Right? Would it be that like, there has to be, there can't be something else in the water down below there, right? So like if there is a huge boulder or something like underneath the water, it doesn't work. Or does it have to have a boulder of a certain kind of crystal or quartz or whatever, right? Does the building, like, are any of these buildings, like, how far do the basements of these buildings really go down? Like, I don't know what your opinion are on Tartaria is, but I think Tartaria is a variety of things. But I think the reason that they've allowed such robust discussion about it is because it's by its nature demoralizing and a limited hangout. Right?
Yeah,
Everything
I can see that. I can
better
completely see that because
right?
they kind of shamed people like, look what we used to have, look at how grand and wonderful it was, and blah blah blah.
Also,
I think there's a lot of truth to it as far as all the different layers of things and resets and whatnot.
right. But mostly the demoralization of we're so stupid, we don't remember anything, right? And everything old is much more beautiful than anything new. And it's a very, it's a demoralizing message, but it's also a message that keeps people stuck looking at something that's already over, as opposed to with eyes towards the future, right? But I think all the things you said also are true, that like it opens up a lot of possibilities. It allows for a lot of exploration and wonder, but because of the entrainment that has gone on in media, alternative media for lots of years with, conspiracies and hoaxes and flat earth and this and that and whatever, they're pretty good at predicting where people's minds will go with it. And like in this case, it will be more of, it will act more to demoralize than to inspire, right? Even if people feel like they're doing an inspirational thing, they're looking for old stuff. They're living with a horror.
Gaslighting.
Yes. Right. So, and then the other part that I think is the like literally symbolic limited hangout is the way you recognize the Tartarian building is if the first floor window is sunken below the ground. So, oh, look, there used to be another floor, but the mud flood made it so what used to be the first or the second, like what used to be the first or the second floor is now the basement, which completely eliminates the idea that the entirety of the an exact replica of the entirety of the building exists down below as well, or just more of the building. Like, what if the building is 200 stories instead of 100 stories, right? And and what's going on in that building down there now? Everyone's like, oh, one floor sunken. This is a Tartaria building, end of story, right? But I think like, my guess would be that at least in some buildings that there is a completion of what we see up above the ground down below, that it is not just half of a battery or half of a speaker or half of a whatever we think it looks like, right? It's the whole thing, like you see in these reflections, that it does really exist, and we're just not thinking about it, right? I think that's a possibility in some cases, right? And then there's other, that's just how maybe that's part of the secret of Freemasonry or modern architecture or whatever it is that there's the portion of the building you can see, and then there's the portion of the building you can't. And if you can't, because it's underground, right? Or is it like what I talked about with Juan, where we talked about the Pythagorean palaces, where like if you understood geometric proportions, you could see that there's like another building that exists at a slightly different angle that your mind is just not perceiving because it's not enlightened to Pythagorean ideals, right? So it could be both. And then there's also the people who have figured out that something like what we're talking about exists, and they're going to go looking for it. So they start trying to manufacture access to the upside down or the underground with things they're building. So they don't really completely understand all of the spiritual, metaphysical, physics principles to it, but it's like trying to dig a hole to China, right? They're like doing something like akin to that.
Right.
And then that's interplaying and affecting this as well.
Yeah, they don't understand the workings at all, and yet they're trying to replicate it and use it. But yeah, they don't understand it could have some really negative impacts, or it can change timelines, or,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember in Fringe where there was like that apartment building that was sort of at where the different realities met? Did you see that one?
Yes.
The older woman lived in there and her husband was in the building on the other side.
Yes. Oh my
Reality.
gosh. Yes.
Okay. So for the period of time where the rift was good enough, they were in the same, she could see him, like they were there together. And then as they closed that portal or that rift, it drifted apart. And she kept trying to do things to keep it open, if I recall correct. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. At a certain point, she had figured out what was going on and she was participating in trying to keep that, right, open. So, like, let's just say that there's like one of the secrets of secret societies or private clubs that are located certain places or whatever, is that they're aware that this exists and they have figured out the secrets to accessing it and having a safe return, right? And that has to do with what we're talking about in terms of like perspective, angle of light, perfect reflection in the water, maybe something to do with the sky clock or the idea of parallax, right? Or some of these like lens things that we think of as like lens phenomenons, that on certain days, if you look at something from a certain angle, while that thing exists, you have the opportunity to access another reality and you understand the conditions under which you must return. Like, remember, like in some of the experiments in Fringe where they were crossing over, they knew they were on like a time deadline when they had to come back.
Yes.
If they missed it, they missed it, right? Yep. So what if that's like some of this? And, if you try and do it when it's like this, you might cross over, but you might not be able to come back, or you might cause damage to your reality or the other reality or your body, right? We hear stories of people who've done like portaling or dimension hopping or timeline traveling that like miss a limb or their body doesn't reintegrate well, right?
Yep.
Or we hear about damages to ozone layer or whatever, right?
Right.
I don't know. I didn't live in New York long enough or pay attention to these things, but how many what is the relationship to this idea we're talking about, in your opinion, of like people who go missing in the lake or the river?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of people that don't actually, it's not like they got murdered or something. They may be these people that can go in and out, and they live in the city knowing that they can do that. They stay anchored there for that purpose. I mean, I'm not saying all of them, but I do think there's quite a few people, even maybe, the homeless people. Gosh, it's reminding me of, I don't know what, Fisher King and all kinds of movies with sort of these transient people that they really don't fully, I don't know if they really fully exist on this level, or if they're able to just shift in and out. But I do think there's something to the buildings that I don't know if I want to save it for the second half here, where their very existence is, I kind of really related to what you were saying with Juan about the talismans and things, and
Yep.
how these buildings could be actually like touchstones or anchors to this world. And they almost kind of can keep the people that don't know how to use this technology or whatever we're calling it, it can keep people kind of trapped here with these structures. But I don't know. That's all I'm going to say about that right now.
Yeah. So I think a bit. So here in Austin, there's this layers of mystery about the lake, right? So most people believe you can't go swimming in what's now called Lady Bird Lake, but used to be called Town Lake, because there's some kind of algae or bacteria in it that is not good for you and could, whatever, right? But if you do a few hours of research, you will find that that is not the truth, right? But that they're okay with people thinking that.
Yeah,
Like,
it's convenient.
that acknowledgement is even out there publicly, right? Because for some reason, people are more concerned about like, oh, I might get parasites or I might have a tummy ache or diarrhea than they are about other issues, right? Mm-hmm. That the secondary layer is that there's actually a much stronger undertow or like currents to the lake river than it looks like. And so people don't recognize the level of caution and danger, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's really why you're not allowed to go swimming there. Okay. Now, okay. But most days it looks pretty still out there. And we've been paddleboarding and it's always a lot of work. Right?
Yeah, it is, for sure.
So I don't know about that. But that's, that's the second for people who aren't buying the bacteria thing because they've either gone swimming in it when they didn't know and it was fine, or why are the Lake Austin and the both lakes that are to the west and east of Town Lake, you can go swimming in there. They're actually the water's connected. So that doesn't make any sense. So, people who've asked little bits of questions, there's this deeper thing. They think they've solved the conspiracy with, it's a much more of an undertow or whatever, right? Yeah. What I think, one of the things that I've noticed and observed here is people often go missing and the search for them is incredibly short.
Yes, that's really true.
Incredibly short.
Hear about it for a while, and then it just falls off the radar like everything else.
Well, I'm talking about like sometimes like 10 minutes or an hour, and then they stop looking. The person hasn't been found, and they stop looking, and you never hear any resolution. Right? You'd think that even if somebody saw them go into the water, so they're in the water and they didn't come out, so they're probably dead, but you still recover the body, right? Especially if you have some idea where they went to the water.
Yeah.
Right. So there's also a very strange plane crash that was almost like a Bermuda Triangle kind of thing a few months.
It's going to bring up Bermuda Triangle.
Okay. There was like a really weird one where like someone from the Austin Wildlife like flew a small plane and crashed into the river and was all disoriented. And I was running when it happened. They were able to pull him out. But they're like, this fucker had no idea what was going on. This is not like he was not hurt at all, but he was so confused. He didn't have a concussion, right? It was just like, it was crazy, right?
Wow.
But I haven't done a deep dive. So I'm sure there's people out there that can prove me wrong, but it shouldn't require endless research. I can't find a list of people who've gone missing in the lake and never been found, or a list people who've gone missing and have been found. So it's kind of like a Dave Paulides situation. Do you know who Dave Paulides is?
It's familiar, but I don't
He's the missing 411 guy, the people who go missing.
Oh my gosh, I was literally just thinking, I was like, I know that name because I was going to mention all these people that go missing in the wilderness too.
Right. So it's exactly like that. But I know we have like state parks and historic parks in the Austin area. I don't think that we're in a national park being in downtown Austin, right? But it's that same kind of situation where there's something not making sense here.
Yeah.
right?
I mean, we know we have all of these places around the world that are hot spots for, you know, it's cliche, but the Bermuda Triangle is probably the most famous. And I think you've got these areas that, for whatever reason, ley lines or magnetics or who knows what, where people go missing and we don't know what happens to them.
Right. And so I think that the authorities have figured out so I think there's a couple of possibilities. And some of them are mundane. Like, I think it's possible that the lake or the river is much deeper than people think it is. And they don't really want people to know how deep it actually is. A, because B, it might scare people, but B, because people might wonder, well, why the fuck is it so deep? What's really down there? Are we really on an inland ocean? Is the earth like, is there some inner earth activities? Like all the, there's a variety of places people could go with it in their head.
And
So,
they know people aren't going to go out there and measure.
right.
No one's going to go out there and measure how deep it is.
So if it's really deep, is it just really too expensive to just search and recover? Right. Too time consuming, too difficult, or is it bottomless? And so there's there's no end to how far the person could fall. I think that's one possibility. Right. Like if there's enough room down below for 100-story skyscraper to have an actual literal physical upside down version of itself down there, it would mean it's pretty deep. Right. And if the sky is reflected and there's room for that down there too, maybe we're talking miles deep. If there is a bottom, or maybe there's no bottom, in which case we are dealing with a completely different set of rules about reality than what we think.
Yeah, could be any number of those things.
What if it's actually oceans that are somewhat contained by a bottom, and it's lakes and rivers, or at least some lakes and rivers that are literally vast, endless expanse. And we are completely confused and we believe the inverse of what is true.
That could be, since everything else has been upside down.
Right. And then this one, which is what I'm leaning towards, is that they know what happens. They know that if a person went in on this, whether accidentally or on purpose, on a day when there's certain atmospheric conditions or something like that, that they're not coming back. Or maybe if they're coming back within this window of time. And if they don't make it back in that window of time, they're not coming back, dead or alive. They've slipped into another reality. Now, I don't think the average rescue person would know that, but they would, but whoever's making the rules about how long you're going to search knows that there's something like that, even if they don't know the full depth of it. Right.
Right. It's the secret department at the top.
The Fraternal Order of Police.
Yes.
Right. The Fraternal Order of Police that runs the whole kind of thing.
Yep.
So then you have people who don't necessarily go missing, but they figured this out. They have, and I think that these people I think it's definitely part of the secret of secret societies, right? Yeah. I think it has probably a lot to do with where they put their locations, their statues, their things like the things that they donate money to, right? But I think that there's some of these people that know that if I go to this spot on a day when the sun is at this angle and I see that the sun is hitting this one particular window on this building that is built to look like this and whatever, and the sun is then it's reflecting in the water, that this is a day when I can go exploring, right? And I understand the parameters of my movements. I understand maybe it's you can't go if you have certain things on or in your body. Maybe it's you can't go if you're wearing clothes. Maybe it's you can't be in a motor, you have to be on a bike. Maybe it's you can't have any heavy metal in your body. Maybe it's you can't have any food. Maybe it's you have to be high as a kite. I'm sure there's all these different varieties of things, but there's people who have figured it out either by secret society kind of thing or by chance, right? And I think the people who figured it out by chance are people that we call gang members, homeless people, right? Other types of wanderers, right? Maybe slackliners or fixie bike riders or whatever it is, right? There's a variety of different groups and cultures in some of these locations. And I think some of them have had the experience, whether accidental or intentional, and then have begun to play with it. right? And learn the ropes. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. And then they're also trying to keep notes on their experiences so they can remember where they were when it happened. And we call these notations tags, graffiti tags.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or if there's a hot spot, why, like, how come all of a sudden a homeless encampment turns up? Like, there was no one there last week, and now there's like 10 people, and next week there'll be 30 people there and 40, and then it gets out of control and starts to look like really crazy, and then weird interdimensional things actually do start happening. And then at a certain point, like, it's all gone real fast.
Yeah. And I think that it's been happening.
It's been happening.
I saw so many strange things towards the end of my duration in New York City, actually living there, that I started seeing whatever this world was cracking open, and just seeing these characters of people and transients, that there was like a strange silent understanding between us when our eyes locked.
Yep.
I see you, and I see you too, and I know what you're doing, and you're sort of traversing in and out of this place. It's happening. It's definitely happening.
Yeah. Right. So what if, like, maybe we're, for some reason, and there could be a variety of reasons, it could be something astrological or something, sun related, or it could be because of some new technology that's been brought online, or just where we are in time, that for some reason, like, the access is much more open, the veil is thinner, or there's just more, like the areas of the Venn diagram that cross over are like more or steadier, right? And what if they were well aware that that was coming, and the lockdowns were a way to try and manage that until they saw how that was going to play out?
No, I definitely think that those were being used for that kind of purpose.
Yeah.
For sure. To carry out plans that had to be done perhaps in the cover of darkness, or other things, if you had too many people out. I think that was really what was going on.
I think it could be to carry out plans, or just to try and, like, manage the situation of something happening that was outside of your control.
Yeah.
Right? And you weren't yet ready to level with the people about.
Yeah. And I think, traveling through these different portals or whatever is something that we can all do. I think we can absolutely all do it, but most people don't have the pieces of the puzzle to put together to do it. And it's been kept from us, from these secret societies, etc.
I mean, I think there are some secret societies that have been keeping it for nefarious reasons. There's probably others that have kept it for fear of fucktards getting a hold of it.
Right. You don't want to put it in the wrong hands.
And everything in between, right? And I think that same thing exists with some of these groups and subcultures and gangs and encampments and whatnot. Like, I think there's like every possible permutation of what something like this could mean going on, right? And it's just everyone who is in the know about it is sort of, it's like the factions of the elite who hate each other but work together because they're not ready for the rest of the world to know for whatever reason, right? And so there's this like complicity of silence, right, kind of thing about it.
Fellows.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
There's like occasionally some kind of story that sort of seeps through and gets everyone's attention, or gets a certain group of people's attention with something like this. And so I would say that one of them was the Elisa Lamb situation, right? And Nish and I did 5 shows on it.
Yeah, I loved that.
And the other situation, like, there's a situation that's going on here in Austin right now that I am measured in how much exposure I want to it, because like a person was obviously playing with some of the same things that I'm playing with, right? But someone you and I both know, who's been to Austin, but is not familiar with it in the same way that I am, or to the extent that they are, it is literally through me, right? Had a bunch of things to say about a particular location in Austin after they'd had an intense experience sort of elsewhere, not here, right? And the location was stuff that I looked into and played with, but hadn't sort of solved the puzzle of in any meaningful way, right? Had a bunch of things and a conclusive statement to say about that. And then shortly there, and simultaneously, a person had gone missing here in Austin, or some, I didn't know they had gone missing. I had noticed that there was an altar. I talked about this in a show with Michael, that there was an altar set up to a gentleman. And instinctively, I knew it was going to be somehow related to this stuff that I look into, right? And I just wasn't ready to deal with it. So I didn't look at it for a while. And then one day I just, put on my big girl panties and did a little research on what had happened to this person, right? And everything about this person indicated that what the other person had told me about a specific location was exactly right. And these two people obviously did not know each other, but the person who went missing, I don't know, I can't find any conclusive, the statements don't say so-and-so died, or so-and-so was killed, or so-and-so went missing. It's all very opaque, right? He was riding his bicycle the last time he was seen, or just the last day of his life or whatever, right? But he was riding his bicycle. The altar was, and he was apparently riding his bike in this area that I have, since I first got back here a couple of years ago, pointed out as like a jump off spot, right? And everything about this person's history and biography matches what this other person said. And also this person is interested in all of the things that Michael and I and Nish and I and other guests have come up over and over and over again. This person was obviously looking at the same thing I was looking at, right? And there was all of this undeniable information about a specific location and the way it plays out that was like, yeah, like this can't be wrong. Like that would be the highest coincidence of all times, right? And so like, okay. And so I don't know if this person chose to go missing, or if it was an accident that they went in and couldn't come back out, or maybe they had been going back and forth and just decided that they like it better wherever they've been going and they're going to stay there. There's like a million, remember in Fringe, when the doors between the universes closed, some people decided to stay on the opposite side.
Yes.
Right? So, like if you're exploring many worlds, the chances are you might possibly find one you like better than this one. And if the door, because I think some of these doors are only open for a season and some are open in cycles and some are open all the time and whatever, right? So if you find one that you like and, you have to choose stay or go, you may choose to go, right? And then the mystery to your loved ones.
Better, of course, than, yeah. Right.
So there's all of these things, but I think that I think this stuff is all around us all the time. And I think you're 100% right about anyone can do it. But I think there's some I don't know if I want to say rules and laws to it. There's some factors that determine who can do it, how, when, why, where, all that kind of stuff, right? It's not out of the realm for anybody, but I think it works differently for different people. There's not a hard and fast rule as to how you do it that works for everyone all the time in every circumstance.
Right. I do think there's all different ways of doing it too.
All different ways of doing it.
I think there's different portals that go different places that have different sets of rules.
Yes.
Perhaps.
It's like everything. There's many modes of travel. You have to consider the laws, where you're coming from, where you're going to, the mode of transportation, all that stuff, right?
Yep.
I think I'm going to stop on where I'm going with that is what I want to talk about in the second hour. But before we wind up this part, I just want to touch on the other thing that I think is sort of a factor in some of this. And I don't know if it's separate, if it's like a separate kind of thing or the same, but just a different aspect of it, or if they're separate but related. And that is, you know, when you're dealing with some of these buildings that are being erected, these modern buildings that are going up all around while everybody's looking for old Tartarian buildings, right? They all have very reflective surfaces. So I pulled up some just reflective buildings. That's all I searched, right? Mm-hmm. And what you get with these are sometimes they're reflecting other buildings. Sometimes they're reflecting the sky or the nature that's around them. Sometimes their own geometry is created for effect, right? And if you, like when you look at a building like this one, it's hard to say, am I looking at a reflection or am I looking through glass? Which side of the glass does that little hill and pink sky exist on?
Right.
Right. There's some like, you know, like there's some buildings like this one, like look at that. Right. Are some of these, when we're seeing the sky reflected in the building or like another building reflected in the building, right? Is that really just a reflection or is there another one? Right? Or if it does something like distort the building that's reflected in it to where you see that there's like a rift here in the windows, mm-hmm. Like, is that the rift spot? Right? Is that like, if you're trying to aim for a target, do you try and go into this building and go in there? Or do you go find the green building and where that window is? If you look towards this pyramid from that window, is that where you can cross over? Right.
It's some of these, the one that's very fragmented in a circular shape there is fascinating to me. I mean, they're all very interesting in their own way, but that makes me think of just different, all different kinds of universes and
right.
And like maybe that's a mega portal that you can go to different, like, you know,
right,
60 different places or something in that building.
There's a lot of buildings like this here in Austin that have these different angles, which reminds me that this is all about angles or angels, like the perspective from which you observe something or experience it, right?
Yep.
Like, so, you know, there's this weird little pyramid down here, right? Like, is that the portal? Or is it somehow like the way the light is reflected opens up some space in the sky, right? There's this one building in Austin that is all reflective, but there's like one square that is not. It's just a window through, but it's hard to tell which one it is. Right? So there's like all these funny things. This is in Chicago where you are.
Yep.
And apparently during the COVID, you weren't allowed to get near it.
Of course.
And if you look at the way the ground is here, it looks like regular cement tiles, but the way it reflects in here, it looks like the grid on like a radar system or a map.
Yeah.
Right? Here you have something that ends up looking like a porthole or a peephole. Right? Look at something like this.
They're making a lot of these sort of Django looking buildings lately.
There's one like this in Austin, right? There's like the very Django kind of thing.
There's at least one in New York City, and there's one across the river in Jersey City as well.
Yeah. So this is a building in London I've talked about before. This looks just like the Beacon from Fringe, right? And then there's like this kind, like, look at this. Oh, hold on a second. I pushed the wrong button. Look at, where did it go? I had one that I was looking at that I was going to show you next. Where did it go? Where did it go? Oh my God, it was perfect. Look at this. This is kind of like the one I was saying that it's hard to tell if it's like the window or the reflection or whatever, right? You have things like that. And then there was another thing I wanted to say, but I forgot. What was it left me. But I mean, this is kind of crazy what's going. Oh, I know. Some of these buildings like you get the entire cityscape reflected in them, like something like this, right? But when you look at it, it makes it look like the buildings are in different places in the city than they actually are.
Yeah.
Right. So like it might be in real life that like this building is actually on the other side of the city from this building, but in the reflection, it looks like they're next to each other.
Yeah, I was encountering that was what I was really observing this last time in the New York area, was the buildings they seemed to be shifting from where
Uh-huh.
it should actually be in a physical sense, geographically.
Right. And you get some of these that just capture certain things that it's like, what is this? Right. Like when you capture, I mean, there has to be more to this than, and I think this is, I don't know if these are actual technologies or just technologies that are there to allude to ideas, to stoke people's creative minds as to what is possible, dependent upon how they view things, right? So I don't know if it's like the idea or the thing or somehow a relationship between the idea and the thing.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And then the last thing I wanted to say, and this goes for both the buildings that are like this and the reflections in the water. Sometimes there's more definition of the thing in the reflection than there is in the reality, which begs a couple of questions.
It made me think of something I just saw where a mirror aids your vision to see things that you might not be able to see right in front of you.
Correct. According to our mutual friend, right? Sometimes we can even see people that aren't there, right?
I can go into that. I have seen people, yes.
Right. The infringed, they would use a mirror and a typewriter to communicate with the universe early on, right? Mm-hmm. But also the bigger question is, how do we know that we are in the real world and that the thing we think of is the reflection and not the other way around?
Right.
What if we're the secondary universe? What if we're the mirror for someone else? Like we think of it often. Right?
Yep.
I mean, I remember when we were on the first time I noticed it, Laura was paddling me around on the lake because it hurts my back to paddle on the paddleboard. So she paddles me around like I'm Queen going down the Nile or something like that, right? Also, she's really Laura. Yes. Fortunately, I'm little, so it isn't that much more work, but great arm workout. And she likes to keep, she had got great biceps and great arms. But we're sitting there, and it was a day that the sky was reflected perfectly. This was when I first started thinking about this, as I was noticing it with the sky before I noticed the buildings. And I was looking down, right? And I was looking at the cloud in the water. And I said, I wonder, like, if I could just dive right into the cloud, right? But it looked like there was something inside the cloud. And so, we always have a conversation about, like, are UFOs hiding in the clouds? Yeah. Like, are there platforms in there? Are there structures? I could not see that in the cloud in the sky, but I could see it in the one in the water. Right? And so that's really what started me thinking about this stuff. Right.
Well, it sort of reminds me if you have on a certain pair of sunglasses or something where you could see things look somehow clear, or you definitely see things that you can't see with your, without the lens on. I think there's definitely something to it with the reflection and the mirroring.
I think there's, I don't know if you've noticed with your own camera, but like sometimes I'll go to take a picture because I see something phenomenal in the sky, whether it's object or whether it's just colors. Mm-hmm. And for a second I see it, and then like the phone changes the colors. It like won't let me for like 1 second it's there and then it's gone.
So irritating.
Yeah. And it's fascinating. It's almost like there's a sentience or a relationship kind of thing, right? Where like the technology and the thing itself are like communicating to keep it cloaked.
Yep.
Right. Or it's just the technology and they don't want us to see. I don't know, but I suspect there's something more deeply weird than just controllers and controlees, right?
I'm with you there, especially with the camera thing.
The controller controlees narrative keeps people tied up for a really long time.
Yep.
And so it just kind of, in the same way that like the Tartaria type of thing. Again, I'm not rejecting everything about Tartaria because a lot of those ideas of looking at that stimulated what I'm thinking about now. But at a certain point, I was like, we're not getting anywhere at this. I have to go somewhere else with it, right? Yeah. And when I kind of released that, then things started to go. The last thing I wanted to say is in this segment, and then we'll move over into the supporter segment. Early on, when we were talking about the water, you said that apparently water now has memory or sentience or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So is it that it didn't used to, and now it does, or that it always did, we just weren't recognizing it?
Well, I was sort of saying that facetiously. I think that it always has. It's just that that's the latest, greatest thing in the last couple of years with science, where they've been putting out all these different articles and journal papers about water having memory. And I can't remember what else. So basically, if you send love towards your water, it'll act a certain way. And if you send...
Right, the Emoto experiments, yeah. Do you think that it's somehow there's like a relationship or a connection between like water's ability to store information and the capacity that we've built to do so with technology, and that the water will literally reflect whatever is going on? And so as we have become more capable of storing more information, so has the water. Or just more information is being created, so there's more for the water to remember. So it seems like it's doing things that it hasn't done before. It really isn't. It's just, there's just more to do now.
I don't know if there's more to do. I mean, that could be possible, but I think, well, it's probably a combination of things. I don't know. I think water's always had this capability, property to store information and memories. It's just that, and I think people have been using all of this technology with the architecture and all the things we're talking about with reflections and frequencies and all that. I think that knowledge has been around for a very long time. It's just that for whatever reason, that kind of information is seeping out to us now about the water and its properties and capabilities.
Even for us, people who explore all this stuff, all of us have been exploring the idea that like when they put people in mind control programs, they put them in water tanks for like a long time, but we're just coming to some of these other ideas about the water. So it kind of is like really the secret that's been hiding in plain sight. Yeah. Right. Because of the way we think about it. Okay, water is something you drink, you take a bath in it, blah, blah, blah. There's a finite amount of it, and it's disappearing, or it's not. There's always the same amount, it just changes forms. Like we have like, just the things we're presented seem like a lot of things to know about water. But then there's this whole other reality to it that like even those of us who question everything didn't question.
Right.
Not that long ago, right? So yeah.
And it makes you wonder why, I mean, why is it happening now? Why are we looking into this now?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is a continue to look into it, both literally and figuratively kind of conversation that we can probably carry on for, quite some time. And just, the more our attention is drawn to these things, more different, that people will have different things to say and then cross-check and compare notes. But I also think it's going to require some of us growing some balls and jumping in.
Right.
I might volunteer to do it. We'll see.
I love research, so I probably will too.
So I meant literally jumping in the water.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe.
So we're going to move over into the patron segment where I'm going to do the great reveal on my discoveries about what some of these buildings are. And I think I know how some of it works, that it maybe is going to be a good starting point. And I think it also, it's fun. It's inspirational. It's not, dark and dreary necessarily, although some people will always find a way to make it that.
Of course.
JJ, where can people find you if they want to chat with you, or if you want to chat or not? And also, like, you make beautiful jewelry. Can people buy your jewelry? Like, what's going on with that?
Thanks. Yeah, I have a website. It's rendeblancbrand.com. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I can never remember my handle, so I'll have to give it to you.
I'll link it up for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, anybody can contact me about jewelry or weird stuff, whatever. I'm open to it all.
All right. Well, I totally love having these conversations with you and cannot wait to continue it on the other side. So guys, we will see you over there. Patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com or rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. We will see you on the other side.